From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined with our guest super producer, Casey on the Case Pegram. Most importantly, you are here, and that makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Quick disclaimer, full disclosure, this is an intro episode, and we weren't aware of the timing. We did not know when we were writing this that we'd be recording it mere hours after the SAG-AFTRA union announced their strike against the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. I don't know about you guys, I fully support SAG-AFTRA. This concept, the concept that really broke the back of the negotiations, is something regarding AI-generated replacement of writers and actors, which we predicted years and years ago. It's a story for another evening, but the timing is really interesting.
Yeah, the other big problem with that whole thing is that the streaming business has really changed everything, and at least according to the head of SAG-AFTRA, the contracts have all remained the same, even though the business model has completely changed.
100%. I mean, I guess the studios could argue that their end has changed as well, or at least in terms of their ability to make money or the dilution of everything because of so many opportunities that there's a lot of like confusion surrounding it. But the fact of the matter is that the contracts should change to go along with, all of these sea changes in technology and distribution of this type of media.
Sort of like wages keeping up with inflation, another thing the powerful hate to talk about. But tonight, in preparation for that upcoming examination, we are looking back on the early days of Hollywood. Fellow conspiracy realist, if you are not aware, this history is very much cyclical. There was an era back in the day, way before the rise of the mouse, when studios often functioned as almost arms of government all their own, sovereign micronations in their with their own fiefdoms. And surprise, surprise, the old studio system was full of conspiracies. This is a bit of a grab bag, and critics say not much has changed in the modern day. Here are the facts. What do we mean when we say studio system?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, when it's interesting, the term studio often, I think, in people's minds refers to a physical space where art is created, whether it be like an art studio, a recording studio, or a film studio, which is a much larger operation than either of those two previous examples. You have to have a series of massive spaces that can house sets and amass props and equipment and personnel, of course, offices, all of these things. So these are the studios. They're housed on these studio lots. And oftentimes, especially in the golden age of cinema, on-location shooting was not a thing because of the absolute gargantuan size of the equipment and the needs for infrastructure to be able to do that. So they would film all of these things on these studio backlots in these giant sound stages, which are essentially warehouses. But the studio system refers to essentially, I guess monopolistic is probably not too much of a overstatement, but a group of studios, quote unquote, these companies, these organizations that were the only games in town. And by the town, referring to Hollywood, of course.
Well, and one of the big things, at least early on in the studio system, that made them feel monopolistic was because they were vertically integrated, right? Like, you're not only shooting, like you're talking about in the studios, you're shooting the films. You've got the films written for you, maybe by writers who work at the studio.
Staff, yep.
Don't you distribute the film as well? And then also even maybe have like a cinema that is owned also by the same studio system that then shows the thing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Matt. I want to go back a bit and put this in the context of time. So the golden age of Hollywood, mentioned just a few seconds ago, conventionally starts with Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, which, lionizes and glorifies the KKK, but starts this golden age. The monopolistic stuff comes a little bit later. The studio system, the heyday, it's sort of right. It's like after the fall of silent film and after the rise of talkies. And you're absolutely right. With the vertical integration, there are these 5 studios that are still familiar, most of them today, that run the game. And there's something else called the Little 3 studios, which are sort of the Luciferian rebels against the Big 5. They owned the Big 5, MGM or Metro Goldwyn Mayer, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Fox, RKO is the dead one. They owned the theaters in which they aired their films. This was a catbird seat. Independent outfits had no chance of breaking through. If you wanted to be an actor, you weren't paid like by the film. You had a contract with a specific studio. You couldn't jump around, to quote Chris Cross. And if you were an independent creature or entity making entertainment, you were absolutely screwed. Even if your film was objectively really good, the game was rigged. That's a common conspiracy in so many industries, both then and now. Maybe we talk like, I don't know, the Little 3 are kind of the exception. They were, in many ways, well, I almost beeped out this phrase. They were creator created. You know, like your Chaplins and your Fairbanks would say, these studios are screwing me over. I want something that gives me more creativity, gives me more control over content.
And we certainly see that today with independent houses like Oscilloscope, which was founded by, I believe, one of the Beastie Boys. The name is escaping me. Which one? But this reminds me, too, this integration of what we see today with things like Live Nation, where they not only represent the artists, they also own all of the venues and the ticketing operations, essentially. So, I mean, it's set up to fail for anyone that's outside of that system.
100%, and it's another example of why it's so tough to start a car company, right? A very different industry, but still has some of the same broken rules. This business, you think Hollywood is dirty today? I mean, first off, you're right. But this business was way, way dirtier by modern standards. Matt, like you said, the integration means these guys don't just, since they own the theaters, you might go to a town that has one theater, and that has an MGM theater. So you can see all the movies you want, so long as they're made by MGM. You can have any color Model T you want, so long as it's black. That kind of thing. There were independent theaters. Even at this time, there were local, like mom and pop theaters. And if they wanted to show a Paramount or an MGM film, it was like they had to call a cable company. Remember back before everybody cut the cable cord, if you wanted the one good channel, you had to sign up for a package with like 25 to 50 other channels.
Stuff that you didn't even want.
Yeah, that you would never watch.
And now, I mean, not to
ESPN 6, it's just like competitive ocelot pickleball.
For sure. And not to get too into the weeds, but what we talked about at the top of the show, the new model of streaming that was essentially designed for the benefit of the consumer.
Sure.
You can choose. You have all this choice. But it's so diluted because the one show that you want is on this one streaming service with a whole bunch of other stuff that you don't want. So when you have this a la carte system, you end up amassing all of these various subscriptions to the point where you're probably paying more now than you ever were for those obnoxious cable bundles back in the day.
Oh, for certain we are. It's just the reality of it. And it's interesting how we saw for a while there, we're jumping to modern day just for a second, but for a while there, we saw places like, then it was iTunes and then YouTube.
Sure.
And other places offering like, you can download the whole season of whatever this is, and it only costs $24.99 or something. And most of us thought that's egregious. I can't pay that much for one show that I like.
However, $1.99 an episode.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's just weird.
Or $6.99 a month.
Yes.
Over time,
right.
You're paying way more and you have zero ownership. And that show you like might eventually vanish from the service that you subscribe to. It happens all. They're bouncing around all over town.
Like how 1984 was pulled off, was one of the first books to be pulled off the Kindle.
Exactly. Or shout out to our former boss, David Zaslav, who just pulled a bunch of stuff off of what is now known as Max.
ODZ.
Because HBO doesn't exist anymore, I guess.
You know what?
No, it does.
Also
it's a subsidiary, and it's so confusing.
Let's be honest about this too. Like in full transparency, yes, when our little archipelago of podcasting was owned by a previous corporate giant, Discovery, Yes, because Discover's the credit card company. When it was owned by Discovery, the big boss, the dog of the place, was a guy named David Zaslav, who now is in charge of Max Warner Brothers, and not only has encountered heat for pulling a lot of shows, but also pulled a GQ article about how he pulls things from the public.
Yep.
Which I have not, now we have spoken briefly with this guy.
Yeah. Well, he spoke at us a couple times. And then we went to Silver Spring, I think, once or twice and saw his office.
A kids show.
Yeah.
We did a kids show where the star of the show was a capuchin monkey. I missed that monkey.
I wasn't part of that. That sounds like fun, but also a hilarious anecdote in retrospect.
It was a time for sure. But we're saying this because you see again that's the message of this episode tonight. We see these cycles at play. When you are a local theater back in the golden age of Hollywood in like a small town in, let's say Whoop-de-Doo, Oklahoma. Which I don't know if that's a real town. If it is,
good people there. That's all I can tell you.
If it is, congratulations. Your town name is awesome.
Let's say you're a Paramount Theater.
Okay.
Wait, are you a Paramount Theater or are you local?
You're a mom and pop theater.
You're independent.
And there's a film that's come out that is amazing. It is the Ghostbusters or the vibes of its time. And you got to get it in your town. You're the only theater in Whoop-de-Doo.
A tent pole. Like one that if you're missing out on this, you're missing out on money.
A summer blockbuster. Yes. Yeah. And so you go to, let's say Paramount made the film. You go to Paramount and you say, hey, we want to make an agreement with you, big studio, to show your film in our little town in Oklahoma. And then what they would do was exactly like what cable companies would do decades and decades later. They would say, we'll give you a deal. You can have this version. What's like a version of vibes?
Casey, do you have a really good 1930s film?
1930s. Perfect.
Citizen Kane, but that's RKO, so it's a different situation.
We're changing the story.
Yep.
So RKO comes in.
RKO's going to play hardball.
Yeah, RKO comes in and they say, we'll make you a deal. You can see Citizen Kane as one of the 5 movies you must buy from us at the following non-negotiable price. And you say, well, I just want Citizen Kane. And they say, well, we all just want things.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's say your movie theater, you're not just going to show one film, right? So it kind of makes sense for the theater, right? Even if you're an independent theater, you need more than one film, and you probably can't go to RKO and Paramount and all the other places and say, I want just your one film.
They might have exclusivity.
Exactly.
Well, and also you typically with having like a small theater like that, there's sort of the idea of curation where like you want to have the big tentpole one, but then you might also want to have some other ones, smaller ones that maybe, aren't as popular that you are able to choose and say, I stand behind this one.
Well, that's what we have now, right? And I'm thinking about like the Terra and some other places.
Landmark,
I went to the Landmark Theater, the Midtown Arts Cinema, and went and saw a very small independent film called The Lesson, which I quite liked. And they're also screening the new Mission Impossible movie.
Oh wow!
Which they can do now.
It's easier to do now. Exactly.
And the thing is these exclusivity contracts could also go further into some pretty aggressive, pretty sketchy business tactics. Let's say you're at Whoop-de-Doo, Oklahoma, you're in contact with RKO, you're trying to get Citizen Kane, and you can't afford the deal because it's going to give you 4 other stinker movies. This gives RKO two tremendously evil business advantages. First, it cooks the distribution numbers for their stinker films. Mm-hmm. Those are also going to be something that they can look back on accounting-wise and say, great job to each other. Second, this can be damaging to that indie theater, so you can say, you as RKO can say, and I know things are tough out there. What if you just sold the theater to us? And that model is quite effective because it's weaponization of economy of scale. This isn't even the crazy part yet. And these independent theaters kind of like suppliers for Walmart now. They can't say no to the deal. It's the only game in town. There's not another way to get Citizen Kane. And so these movies would be distributed. This was unsustainable. So they made the equivalent of billions of dollars in 2023 money. And it was a halcyon era for villains. It was the salad day to be an evil mogul, you know?
But it's also when, I don't know, it's
some
so weird.
Amazing stuff was
right?
made. Yeah.
It's so weird to think about it that way, because it really, if you don't look at the money and the power behind it, you have the dreams, like literally the dreams of
Wizard of Oz.
Actors, of the public, people that got to see the movies.
Sure.
Like, it changed the way we viewed the world.
Well, I mean, Casey mentioned Citizen Kane, which I don't believe was as massive of a hit at the time as we might perceive it to have been, because it's so influential. I think it did ultimately end up becoming a success, but when you go back and watch that movie now, it does not feel dated. I mean, it certainly has, hallmarks of the time, but some of the camera techniques and the things that Orson Welles was coming up with to achieve some of the look of that picture, unbelievable stuff that is still used today. So this was like a testing ground for innovative cinematographers and set designers, and all of the stuff that we now take for granted, I think, was sort of being cooked up in this studio system.
Yeah, let's put it this way. What if history went different and paint, the idea of paint, of colored stuff you could put on things and it would dry on walls, what if that was invented in an age where people could communicate via telegram and telephone? Like, what if someone just figured out paint in 1910? That's kind of what happens. And this is untrammeled ground. This is a new thing. This is like, creatively, this is like making a colony on the moon and learning how that works. So there's this, it's a flood of innovations. It's a watershed moment. And Matt, you make this beautiful point. Like, of course, there is enormous power to this. There are innovations that come along once in, not even one, but like 3-4 generations. This is, what film is like. It's like when the Wright brothers figured out powered flight, but everyone could suddenly buy a powered airplane and make their own improvements on it. I'm just trying to think of adequate comparisons.
At the very, maybe not own one, but at the very least enjoy the benefits of it.
That's a good note.
Because it wasn't until more modern times that even the ability for an independent individual to make something that resembled a serious motion picture was even possible. Back then that's the point, right? No one would have had the ability or the infrastructure to make any of these innovations outside of that studio system because of all the investment and all of the insane power and money that was flowing through those systems. Now, you kid with a camera and iMovie, and a little bit of Get Up and Go can make like a music video that rivals Michel Gondry. I mean, it's pretty incredible. But back then, that was not within the grasp of anybody outside of those studio systems.
So let's do that. Let's jump around in time. Leading into this next part, what you need to know, folks, is everything you're about to hear happens before the May 4th, 1948 court case, United States v. Paramount Pictures, which spelled doom for the industry. Federal antitrust laws came down. Studios today no longer fully own theaters showing movies. TV is on the rise. Ticket sales are dropping. This changes the way the Big Five make films for a time. It seemed these predatory monopolies would be broken until, you zoom out. You see how cyclical these things have become. Are there really any big Hollywood studio conspiracies? Yes. As a matter of fact, Hollywood was committing crimes about as prolifically as it made films, which is to say, constantly. We're going to pause for a word from our sponsor, and then we're going to have to dive in. Heads up, this is going to contain at times graphic information. Here's where it gets crazy. This is all absolutely true. You've heard of the sketchy accounting, Hollywood accounting. It's true. It continues today. There are also multiple cover-ups of everything from white-collar crime to sexual assault and, yes, homicide. Matt, you also mentioned while we were taking our break, the breaks for you guys are just like a couple minutes or so. But for us, we make a day of it. We like go on a road
picnic
trip.
lunch.
We have a picnic lunch. We do like a rom-com. And we talk a lot. Matt, one thing you mentioned was also the role that studios played in weaponized propaganda, which maybe is not illegal in the U.S., so wouldn't count quite the same as a crime, but it's very much, I think, a moral crime.
It's not. In my mind, it's not a crime. It's a powerful weapon that was realized, right?
Sure.
Because before that, you could reach audiences with radio, and you could tell people, "Oh, there's this evil force out there, and we need to, combat that force." But
the
now,
Jerrys have advanced upon Normandy.
Well, now you can show people
right.
especially with talkies. Now you can show them and tell them at the same time while they're in a captive state in that movie theater.
You got to wonder too if maybe some of that led to some of the sweetheart deals between the government and the studio systems that allowed some of this corruption to flourish for so long. I don't have exact examples of this, but I do have to wonder if before that court case that you mentioned, Ben, the U.S. government was maybe willing to not consider this a monopoly in exchange for some of that powerful communication assistance.
For a time, federal authorities would have absolutely intervened on the behalf of not actors but studio heads. So if you had a studio head who needed a favor, that's how one hand washes the other. And we've got some great past episodes on propaganda. Highly recommend it. And if you are, what we should do? I want to make a good website to share things out, because I would love to share a playlist of wartime propaganda films, and they're not the ones you expect, not just like Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse talking about World War II in vaguely racist ways or extremely racist ways. Stuff like warnings about atomic energy from paint companies.
Oh, 100%. I think I've mentioned this before too, but if anyone is ever in San Francisco and they want to really get a good look at a curated collection of some of these Disney propaganda films that were incredibly ubiquitous at the time, but that the actual Walt Disney Company would rather you maybe not think too much about, go visit the Walt Disney Family Museum, which is part of the Walt Disney Family Trust, unconnected to the Walt Disney Corporation.
Oh, wow.
So if you go to this, it's in the Presidio in San Francisco, there's a whole section on some of the wartime propaganda that Disney participated in, and it's fantastic.
So back to the crimes of the golden age of Hollywood and these monopolistic studio systems. First, we spoke about cycles. If we're being fair, we have to understand the cycle starts before what we call the Big Five. In the early days of Hollywood, the reason Hollywood is a thing is because these folks were running from an earlier oppressor. Just like, before Zeus and the gang start oppressing the Grecian society, the mortals, they're beefed up with the Titans. There's another oppressor, and the abuse carries down. That's why that religion has so many powerful metaphors, that belief system. These early filmmakers were like open-minded, bohemian, jazz cigarette types, and they were on the run to the West Coast because they loved cameras, but having a camera was like having a ring of power, and where Thomas Edison is Sauron, because he would get word that someone's filming. So, and they're not paying him a huge ass licensing fee to help him further oppress Nikola Tesla. So he would send out goons to break their cameras, to sometimes beat the snot out of them and get his money. So these folks lit out for the territories. They headed west, and for a while, they were pretty progressive for their era. They were pretty experimental. They would try a lot of things. In the 1910s, this really took off, and studios just couldn't print film fast enough. It was, historically speaking, until the present day, it was probably one of the best moments in history to get into the entertainment industry.
I mean, the four of us were very lucky to get in on the ground floor, relatively speaking, of a new-ish industry in the form of podcasting. As one of the only new-ish industries that I can maybe think of in recent history, this time that we're talking about here was the time to get in on the ground floor of filmmaking. And that's why some of these studios that we're mentioning are still the biggest players in the game today, because they were the first to market.
And like Thomas Edison before them, this innovation, this success, this fame, it had an arguably corrupting nature. These studios that started off small became very big. They started aggressively consuming their competitors, and it became more and more a business and less a creative enterprise. It was run by extremely powerful, extremely rich dudes. Eventually, these studios got so powerful that the guys in charge, and they were all guys, said, we can do whatever we want. There aren't really any consequences. How much does a city councilman cost?
You mean all in?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Right? Or just for the weekend?
Yeah, that's true. You can rent one.
Yeah.
Rent to own, perhaps, right? Isn't that sort of the equivalent of like long-term payoffs?
I guess, yeah. You're right. There was an article I found on Crime Reads that talks about how this realization that there were no consequences translated into very dangerous stuff. Drugs, sex trafficking, organized crime, they became incredibly normalized. And along with that, if you've never worked for organized crime, what you need to know about working for organized crime is that sometimes the side benefits are really good, but overall, it's a very bad job. And HR is not a thing, and workers' rights are not a thing. So one example we found is like you would have this contract as an actor. You would be filming 18-hour days, and if you were too tired, then they would have a guy on set who comes with some sort of pick-me-up, an amphetamine of some sort. Right.
See? Mommy's little helpers.
Drugs you up with a little yellow pill, and then you're up, and you can't sleep. So you got some other person who comes along, gives you something to help you sleep. And if you are unable to wake up for an ungodly hour to start a shoot, then the studio has a doctor on site who can give you a little shot.
And we're largely referring to talent.
Talent,
yeah.
yes.
So, I mean, we hear horror stories about this, like Judy Garland, for example.
Exactly.
Was so just absolutely in a drugged out haze, and she talks about it. And it led, due to no fault of her own, to serious drug and alcohol addiction, and problems that just absolutely ruined her life, while also somehow managing to have her be one of the biggest, most recognizable stars on the planet.
And after a certain time of having someone continually, not just psychologically ritualize this, but get you physiologically addicted to a shot of some sort of stimulant in the morning, way past coffee, right? I say that as a coffee addict. Thanks again, Matt, for the excellent iced coffee.
And shout out to Brash Flash Brew Coffee.
Here we go.
Because it's fun to say Brash Flash. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it becomes normalized, and then the point is, eventually, the actor just cannot perform without that shot in the morning or that pill at night.
That's human trafficking of tactics.
100%, Matt. It also further increases the studio's grip around the neck of that person.
And not only did they not have what we think of as rehab today, this is not even something that would have even been considered. This was a feature, not a bug. This was like part of the system to create that stranglehold that you're describing.
It's like,
Ben.
good job, Doc. We'll string this one around. We can get another 14 films out of it. Like, don't you mean her? Whatever.
Potato, Doc. Yeah. Get out of here. You bother me.
Matt, you're going somewhere with human trafficking, I know, because this reminds me of the dirty secret from our K-pop episode. When studios had VIPs coming in, whether it's the Archduke of Southwestern Prussia, which I made up, or a high-level government agent or someone you want to bribe, then they would turn out their actors, male and female. And they would say, oh, well, Mayor Frankenlooper, that's not as funny. What's a silly name?
I can't think of one sillier than Frankenlooper, Ben. I'm sorry.
Mayor Frankenlooper Whoop-de-Doo. Okay, of Whoop-de-Doo, Oklahoma, is coming into town. And he's a big fan of yours. So why don't you, it's very
Show
disturbing.
him a good time.
Why don't you be a good girl and go to his hotel?
Or a good boy. Right? Which was also very
super
common.
prevalent.
Yeah.
Only that was buried. I mean, the idea of queerness or any element of that at the time would have been reputation annihilating,
And Matt, I think Matt, you may also be alluding to child abuse, which was rampant.
No question.
Both.
Like that studio exec. This is a great Shirley Temple story. All right, so Shirley Temple is like 11 years old. There's a studio exec who drops his pants and shows his junk, again, to a child. And the kid laughs her ass off. She thinks it's ridiculous. And so this, because those monsters are all about power, right? So laughing at someone, ruins the power anyway. Temple escaped, was like the guy called security, got rushed out of the room because she laughed at him. And that's frightening because it shows us how common this was.
It also shows how, by age 11, Shirley Temple clearly already had an absurdly thick skin. And whether or not, I mean, again, the context is maybe a little unclear, but I would argue that perhaps she kind of already understood the name of the game at that point.
It's just terrible, terrible stuff.
I just picture Shirley Temple just chain smoking cigarettes at 12. I don't know why I picture that, but it's like probably not far off.
Like a kid who survived an Eastern European war.
No question.
Yeah. And it does get worse. We have even more crimes. Again, this is sort of a grab bag, but one thing I think we all found really interesting was that these crimes were so commonplace, so ubiquitous, so normalized that covering up the crimes itself became an organized part of the institution. It became someone's job. I can't believe it. Finally, without shoehorning it in, you guys, we get to mention comptrollers.
What?
Yeah.
That's what they do?
An evil comptroller is part of this story.
Okay. And maybe known as like a fixer, right? Someone that can come in and clean up your mess. But okay, Ben, I need more.
Okay. I let's introduce this guy. He said fixer. There's a dude that we should introduce named Eddie Mannix. What do we know about Eddie Mannix?
Well, being a comptroller means you're kind of the head money person, right? You may not be the head accountant, but you look at what all the accountants are doing and you go, okay, this is good or bad. And you manage all of that, and you may have say over how money gets used.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you can go in and say, okay, we need to take this percentage out of this budget and put it here. Like you see the big picture, the financial forest.
Yes. And
you're in close contact with, again, those gods on the earth in California, the studio heads. Mannix is old school, dyed-in-the-wool MGM guy. He joins right around the time it gets created, and he is on the payroll all the way up until his death in 1963. So he's there for a long, long time.
And he was general manager too, right?
Yeah, different times, yeah. And so he wouldn't just monitor money. He also monitored again, I keep being reminded of K-pop in the modern day, he would monitor communications with the actors, like on two ways. So it was like being in prison. What they were communicating was often they would listen in. If they were on the phone was tapped. If they were writing letters, someone was reading the letters before they went out.
It also reminds me of the character Mike Armentrout from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, how he gets employed by the Madrigal Corporation, which is like the giant corporate front for this illegal meth operation. And they have to do his paperwork, his I-9s, his all of that stuff to make him on paper this particular position. But in fact, he is their fixer or head of security, but he's really doing much more nefarious things and scouting locations for secret underground meth labs and stuff.
Yeah, dismantling cars to
Right.
find trackers.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison because in practice, no matter what it said on paperwork, Mannix was primarily a cover-up artist. He routinely worked with a crack team to keep stuff out of the news. You got an actor who was in a drunk driving accident and killed someone. Let's make sure that the reporters have something more pressing to talk about. Oh, did a star noted for her wholesomeness have an abortion? Did someone who was sexually assaulted by a studio head have an abortion?
Have you guys seen the Perry Mason reboots or whatever?
Yeah, it's great. It got canceled, but it's great.
Yeah, it was very, very good. In one of the first episodes, there's a kind of Fatty Arbuckle type character, or maybe like a Oliver Hardy type character, who is being stalked by this private investigator, Perry Mason, who gets pictures of him doing like sexy stuff with cake and a sex worker.
Yeah.
You got to watch the episode. But the point is, he gets paid by a studio executive to not release those pictures.
Oh.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is crazy because Mannix works in tandem with the guy who's officially the head of publicity, which is such an Orwellian term when you learn what this guy really did. The head of publicity is dude Howard Strickling. He's an ex-journalist. His main job is to make sure that certain things are never made public.
Yeah.
He's the head of anti-publicity, really.
Yeah. But it's interesting how that works. You're both intelligence and counterintelligence in one role, right? I mean, that's kind of what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to put it, too. Yeah, so he will gladly give reporters other stories to print, especially if he's got dirt on a star from another studio, from someone who's not MGM. And so Strickling kind of runs interference to make sure scandals don't make the papers. And then while he's doing that, Mannix is saying, okay, I understand mistakes were made at that party. You need to go see this doctor, and I'll give you X amount of money, and you're going to leave town. Go back to whoop-de-doo.
Dude, I'm thinking of a movie, I think it's Coen Brothers, maybe I'm wrong, that kind of depicts
Barton Fink, probably.
Hail Caesar.
Hail Caesar. That's what I was thinking of.
Josh Brolin actually does play Eddie Mannix. So
Casey on the case.
That's it. Thanks,
Boom.
Casey.
Boom, 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 boom.
So really watch that movie because it really shows you this kind of thing in a fictional world that is also based on the person we're talking about.
Kind of like Hollywood Confidential, or LA Confidential as well. This kind of the filthiness of
On
it.
the hush hush or whatever it's called. Yeah.
But I did want to say, Noel, to your Barton Fink example, there's a moment in that near the end of the movie where the studio head suddenly is wearing like a uniform, and he's basically considers himself as an extension of, the war effort at that point.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And so for people who haven't heard of Mannix, there is one story that is perhaps the most infamous. While Mannix is paying off, I should mention this first. While Mannix is paying off / intimidating / threatening victims, if they don't play along, whether you're a victim, just a bystander, you went to the party and you saw the studio head forcing drugs on a woman and dragging her somewhere, and you don't play along, Mannix will call his friends from a subsidiary in New Jersey.
Huh. We're talking about the Shriners, right?
Sure. Just some friends who travel.
Well, let's talk about that really quickly. I know we need to take a break here in a minute, but a movie is a great way to launder money.
Yes.
Because you're talking about huge amounts of money.
Dude.
That get paid to so many different outfits, different companies, different individuals.
Oh, absolutely. It's like almost as good as like a construction grift,
Yeah.
And it actually comes up in a later season of The Sopranos where they make a movie called like Hatchet or something like it's like a mafia meets Saw kind of movie.
Sure.
And Christopher Moltisanti ends up becoming the producer on it, and it of course is a way to disguise money because you're dealing with so many vendors, you're paying salaries. You have easily disguisable employees that you can call one thing on paper, but they're actually doing something else. It gives legitimacy to their employ. You know what I mean? It's Really good point.
Yeah, I mean, podcasting is the next version of that, clearly, but we're legitimate, right? Right, Casey?
No comment.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. All right, bro, I see you. Anyway, so
but you know what's crazy though? If you look online and you're trying to find articles or books or accounts of how much money and what kind of money and where it came from and how it was laundered through old Hollywood, I can't find anything.
It's tough
because I don't know. In all the film classes that I've taken over the years, I've never actually seen concrete examples of a specific mafia, mob, organized crime unit working directly with a studio.
But it's acknowledged.
Yeah, it was just kind of operating underneath.
They got away is another part of it, right? That just behind the curtain, all this stuff is happening. And this organized crime, I love this point. So it 100% happened. It is still happening. By the way, that conspiracy continues. You're just not really going to hear about it if it's you're not going to hear about it unless it's an outsider organized crime thing or a foreign government, like our Chinese film industry conspiracy episode. The reason we know about that is because Uncle Sam doesn't like Uncle She.
That's right. And it certainly does feel like the quote-unquote mafia as we know it depicted in Godfather, Goodfellas, and Sopranos type movies doesn't quite have the prominence that it once did. They've gone a lot more underground.
Right.
Because of RICO cases and things like that.
Or like the Yakuza, they've relocated or they become increasingly enmeshed with the legit government.
100%. That's right.
I did find one example that we can at least point to just quickly, but it comes from 2006.
Again, it's still happening. You could also, if you were of the philosophy that the U.S. military is a form of organized crime, then Hollywood's totally in bed with them too. Just going to throw that hot take in there. I don't agree with it personally, but it's a valid point.
Well, this one comes from 2006. The LA Times reported on it, and it's an outfit called Limelight Films, and it had a couple of executives that were accused of essentially laundering ecstasy sale money through some of their productions and selling to undercover agents through the production. It was really interesting. You can read it right now. If you want to read that article, it's called Movie Execs Charged in Money Laundering Case. That's literally it, and you got to find it.
But you know how easy it is to avoid consequences still as a studio exec? You can just have the companies, the hierarchy and the organizational structure of them are very, very well done, just objectively. It's super easy for a studio exec to say, I had no idea that happened. You know what I mean? Look, detective, I respect what you do. I back the blue, but I make hundreds of movies and hundreds of millions of dollars a year. I don't watch every falling sparrow, and you know what? It does sound like an unfortunate accident, and I wish their family the best. You let us know if there's anything we can do. Now, I've got to take this call at 1:30.
Plausible deniability, man. It's the name of the game.
And that is a hypothetical incident.
I was going there with you.
Yeah. Like, I just feel like it's chilling how plausible that sounds, you know? And again, to your point, Matt, this is 2006, right? And to your point, Noel, this is just that kind of opportunity for crime is going to continue because there is so much money to be made.
Well, and not to mention the police, right? I mean, the police were probably on the payroll of some of these studios off the books as well.
That's why they broke up. That's why they don't make music.
Oh, man.
Let's talk about the actor Frank Sinatra, who was also a musician.
Old Blue Eyes?
He was in a lot of movies.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, you'll recall in The Godfather, I forget the character's name, Casey will probably point it out real quick.
Right.
There's a Frank Sinatra-esque character who becomes a big singing star in Hollywood, and they're trying to, convince this producer to put him in his movie, and that's where the famous horse's head in the bed sequence comes from. And then, of course, that producer decides to change his tune.
Sinatra also, real-life Sinatra, huge sexual predator.
I think it was Johnny Fontaine.
That's right.
Johnny Fontaine.
Great, yeah.
So glad you're here, Casey.
Yeah, thanks for coming, man.
You guys get to see him like every week, multiple times a week.
No.
Don't
This is-
you not?
No, this is a special occasion.
Oh, wait.
He doesn't do Ridiculous History anymore. It's Max. Yeah.
Okay. It's
on
Max.
It's Max with the facts and Casey on the case.
Yeah.
Never the twain shall meet.
Right. I have never seen them in the same room.
Ooh. Well, either way, I'm jealous.
You got a comment on that one?
No comment.
Damn it. All right. Anyway, one day, now I feel like I'm the investigator. One day, Pegram.
Well, but speaking of the investigator, back to the polies.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the law enforcement agency, not the seminal 1980s rock band. At the very least, they were turning a blind eye. At the very most, they were outright getting paid off and perhaps even helping,
Absolutely.
some of these crimes be covered up or perhaps even perpetrated.
100%, dude, because they may have just been fans of the movies. Or, they might have gotten a discount at the brothels.
I'm sorry?
We'll pause for a word from our sponsor. We'll be right back. We've returned. Yes, brothels. We mentioned what sounds like K-pop level sex trafficking with VIPs. But it went much more pervasive, much more extensive than that. And they're both very, very terrible things. We want to introduce you to Louis B. Mayer, who has sometimes been called the monster of MGM. When Harvey Weinstein was convicted for numerous sexual crimes, a lot of people were bringing up the specter of former MGM studio head Mayer. He was talented studio exec, inarguably person with a lot of mental issues and kind of a piece of shit. His reputation remains under debate today. We're talking about this a little bit off air. He was known for routinely micromanaging and obsessively controlling his creators. He was like, stars are no one. I build stars. Do what I say. Which is funny because Eddie Mannix also had a plaque in his office where he said the only star of MGM is the lion. The lion from from that title sequence. Yeah.
The one that you start the Pink Floyd record after the third roar.
But Mayer was known to turn a blind eye to sexual abuse of female performers, probably male performers too. And he also was known to participate in that abuse himself. Never convicted of doing so.
Yeah, and just not devil's advocate necessarily, but just to offer another perspective from someone who perhaps maybe a little too close. There is an essay from Mayer's great nephew, I believe, that defends Mayer's reputation and offered a few quotes from folks like Joan Crawford and also the mention of the idea that Judy Garland, while having leveled accusations that he had fed her pills throughout her career and all of this stuff, apparently this person claims that she rescinded some of those accusations. But again, it feels a little biased and a little tainted with revisionist history and sort of, maybe trying to clear the name of someone who feels their relative has been wronged. But I feel like there's a lot of smoke. So there's probably at the very least a little bit of fire.
Like control of law enforcement too makes it a very difficult problem to navigate, And again, not convicted of stuff, it is considered fairly confirmed that he sexually abused an underage Judy Garland, although, as you said, she would later say that wasn't the case. It's gross, but we do know that he in part funded a brothel that used plastic surgery to make sex workers look like popular stars of
LA
the
Confidential.
day.
That was in LA Confidential.
Yeah. Yeah. and
Is that a proven thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's what's not proven about it is technically the degree to which Mayer was aware. Okay, so it might have been like he knew he was putting something into like the entertainment slush fund.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, gross stuff. No consequences whatsoever. The casting couch was another dirty thing. There was a Fox producer named Daryl F. Zanuck, and according to an author named Marlis Harris, who wrote a book called The Xanax of Hollywood, Dark Legacy of an American Dynasty. This guy had a routine. He ended the day early at 4 p.m. every day. His studio at his office at Fox Century City Studio would shut down, and he would pick a young woman to be hustled through an underground passage to his office.
And this is allegedly as reported in this book, right?
Is reported in this book, yeah.
Interesting personal story. When I worked for public radio, there was a film called Get Low, you guys might have seen, that shot in Georgia, in Crawfordville, which is like a little kind of small town that they use oftentimes for these like old-timey southern, like, burg type shoots. Robert Duvall was in it. Sissy Spacek was in it. I covered it for public radio, and the producer of the film, none other than Dean Zanuck, the great grandson of Daryl Zanuck. His son, Richard Zanuck, Dean's father, won an Academy Award for producing Driving Miss Daisy, launched the career of Steven Spielberg. So that legacy that you're referring to, it is a real thing. I remember one question that I asked Dean when I got to interview him was, how do you become a producer of Hollywood? And he basically said, you got to have a dad who is a producer. You have to be part of that system. No one just pops up and becomes a major Hollywood producer. But even, Dean, he didn't produce any major Hollywood films. He focused more on like Terry Gilliam. He did a movie called The Zero Theorem with Terry Gilliam and this Get Low. But I think the age of that dynasty, producer figurehead is sort of past us in some ways. It's interesting.
I think it's still there.
No, certainly. I'm just arguing, like, why is Dean producing smaller films, whereas his father was literally the guy who made Steven Spielberg's
You're saying
career.
The door's less shut.
I'm saying that's the case.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
It's weird because you and I both work with a former head of MGM, a guy who ran MGM. And it's fascinating to see this person. We're just not going to name who it is, but it's fascinating to see this person doing what they're doing now that formerly ran a giant studio.
Yeah.
I don't know what there is. I guess that's more of a.
This is a room I'm not allowed in.
No,
folks.
no,
I'm
no,
it's
not the case at all.
nothing to do with exclusion.
I
It's
just think the
somebody
studio
we work
system has less of a stranglehold, especially as media has been diluted to the point of absurdity. Things like podcasts and other revenue streams are much more of a part of the portfolio than they ever, you know what I mean? Because no longer are these movies just a sure thing anymore. Are these studios just But
it's interesting to see now. It is they're attempting to find stories that will be super successful in that way. I don't know.
It's interesting.
The point here, though, is that the normalized sexual abuse of actors, male and female alike, during this time was so commonplace that it acquired a name and remains heartbreakingly relevant today, the casting couch. You've heard of this. We don't need to necessarily explain what it is. Unfortunately, the examples are infinite or near infinite at this point, and numerous lurid scandals have occurred as a result of this, and the number of scandals we know about are absolutely dwarfed by the horrific events that the public will never learn about because people took them to their graves. Eventually, the public turns against old Hollywood. They become increasingly fed up with this strange, sinister system, or the form it took at that time. Interestingly enough, the story about Fatty Arbuckle and the alleged death/sexual assault, Arbuckle was probably not guilty, but that story caught on in the zeitgeist so much that it led to the public examining more actual, like real lurid scandals, and there was a moral panic. The old Hollywood system didn't survive as a result past that 1948 court case versus Paramount, but just like a horror movie monster, the thing America thought it killed hid itself away, recuperated, and arguably returned in a slightly different form for a sequel.
So why is all this important? You can start by saying it's important to just understand the past in order to make sense of the present, the precedents of this massive entertainment conglomerate, this industry, because it sets a precedent for the understanding of the current state of the industry in the modern day, which we've hinted at in drips and drabs throughout the episode. So much like a blockbuster film franchise, history, of course, does repeat itself, and sometimes it rhymes.
Mm-hmm. Often with little, or if it's like a modern film franchise, it often repeats with little or no significant change in the plot.
Oh yeah, like
right?
the Fast and Furious movies, like the Transformers movies,
Star
those are the two
Wars.
ones I was thinking. How does it? You know what? Let's do the spoiler. It makes no sense that Palpatine just comes back. That's just
they could have done it in a more clever way. At the very least,
they could have done something.
They could have done something.
And so, Palpatine comes back?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
It doesn't even matter, Matt.
It doesn't really.
It really doesn't.
By the time it happens, it looks cool, but it's not. You know what? A lot of people worked very hard on that film.
And that is a very important caveat to add, by the way. Anytime I or any of us are like poo-pooing film, we are not poo-pooing the individuals that made them, because we know, based on our limited experience on big Hollywood sets, it is insane amounts of work. Here in Atlanta, this city thrives on these types of shoots, and we know people from every sector of that industry. And I mean, these are some of the most hardworking, dedicated, and incredibly talented people that you could ever ask to be a part of any team.
Which is why I am a huge supporter of the strike. And I can't wait till we get to that episode. With on this show, the terror absolutely continues into the modern day. Matt, you and I talked a bit off air about a case that we didn't even get to in this episode, which is it just shows that the organized crime involving Hollywood is not limited to the borders of the United States.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I would call it terror. I would call it like just
geopolitical intrigue.
There you go. That's what it is, because we were just learning about an Israeli agent that was hanging out in Hollywood for a while, a billionaire, made Pretty Woman. That's one of the films he worked on. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Bohemian Rhapsody. This is very recent stuff. There's reporting here from books and a bunch of other reporting from New York Times in like 2011 up until this year about Arnon. I think it's Milchan is how you would say it. But this guy is a Hollywood movie producer billionaire who's also an arms dealer or trader.
You get in situations.
Working for Israeli intelligence. Mm. What? You get in situations? But these are the kind of situations we've been talking about this whole time?
These are situations people could get in. You know what I mean? There's no university course. There's no specific kind of board certification you have to pass to become a producer.
Well, that's to my point about what Dean Zanuck said. I thought it was so interesting. I was like, how does one train to become a Hollywood producer? And there really is no answer to that, because first of all, it's a little vague as to what they even do. There is no one thing they do. You know, they oversee things. The people will often say they handle the money, but they don't exactly handle the money.
Maybe they secure
yes,
funding.
That's right. Yeah.
That's true. I mean, this takes me, like, I really appreciate the time on this. This takes me to other episodes I think we should do, like Saudi Arabia and golf.
I was about to mention that.
The LIV golf tournament has been on my mind for a while.
There's some hearings that are taking place as to whether or not that merger is okay.
Mm-hmm. Good. I'm sure the Crown Prince gives a shit.
I mean, well, that's the point, right? Is the idea of a country with a, let's just very say, as checkered as those things they wear on their head, past of human rights abuse, and all of a sudden, like this giant organization around a professional sport that is huge money in America, basically feeling almost strong-armed into having to merge with these folks to keep relevant. I'm confused as to how it came around.
Seeing it in court, and look, folks, we're singling out Saudi Arabia with good reason. We're not. It's not based on any religious nor racial prejudice. The name for that is the kafea, by the way.
Got it. Thank you. Once again, word of the day.
Look at our previous episode on how the U.S. allows Saudi Arabia nationals, often college students, but not always, to commit crimes and escape.
Yep.
Just to fly
we
out
did
of the
a whole
country.
episode
We did a
on
whole
that?
episode
That's
on
right.
it.
Let's look at bribery scandals from 2012, where studios were caught bribing Chinese officials to get movies in China.
Which we have an episode about.
In
right?
2012,
Yeah,
though.
right. Yes, it continues. It continues because entertainment is so easily weaponized. It is soft power. It is diplomacy. This stuff continues in the modern day. And, I mentioned that I think several of these stories could be deep dive miniseries all on their own. A lot of the research we did hasn't made it into this episode. We have to return for at least 2 more, one on AI, film, and the strikes, and one, probably more than one, on these recent Hollywood scandals, like you're mentioning, Matt. I mean, for now, all we can say is that Hollywood has been cartoonishly, deeply crooked for a very, very long time. And at literally every moment of its existence, just behind the curtain, there's been a ton of stuff they don't want you to know. And we say that as all 4 of us are huge, huge cinephiles and fans of film. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Thank you to our super producer, Casey on the Case Pegram. Casey, how'd we do?
That was great. I've just been enjoying listening the whole time. I had a couple little small recommendations to throw out there.
Oh, yes,
interested.
please.
There's a book called Hollywood Babylon by the recently deceased experimental filmmaker Kenneth Anger. And it kind of is a deep dive into this early Hollywood, seedy underground. And a lot of people have said that many of the things that happen in that book are fabricated. So, you may not take it as the gospel truth, the entire book, but it definitely conveys a sense of that period and just kind of the landscape as it existed. Yeah.
Makes me think of, there's also a podcast by Karina Longworth
Yes,
called You Must
talks about
Remember
that.
This. It
Yes,
talks
yes.
about, I think there's actually a whole series
Exactly.
specifically on Hollywood Babylon,
Yep.
but in general, that is a great deep dive podcast into all of the kinds of stuff we're talking about today.
And there was also a documentary a few years back called Scotty and the Secret History of Hollywood. It's about a guy who ran a gas station who ended up becoming like the pimp to Hollywood in the form of just finding young men, especially for closeted actors,
Right.
and would sort of facilitate these hookups that were next to the gas station.
There was a show that was
Yes,
based
there's
on
also
that.
a Ryan Murphy series that kind of
Yeah. Oh, Ryan Murphy.
Yep.
So it probably is salacious if Ryan
yes,
Murphy
exactly.
is involved.
Oh, it is.
It's funny, the documentary is very like upbeat about this guy, and even though he's sort of known as like the pimp of Hollywood, apparently the way he tells it anyway, he was just sort of like allowing people that were in the closet, which was most actors in that period
Totally.
felt like they had to be closeted. He was facilitating them to be able to express themselves sexually and so on. So it's a very interesting documentary anyway.
And we know, again, thank you, Casey. And we know that there's much, much more to all of these stories. We'd like to hear the stories of old Hollywood scandal, corruption, crime, and conspiracy that speak to you. This didn't have deep dives in it. It is more of a grab bag to set us up for future actions, the way that the French government has changed the laws about surveillance. Deep cuts, callbacks. We want you to call on us. We want you to reach out and touch faith on the internet. You can find us on all sorts of platforms.
Also, don't forget to touch grass, by the way. Make sure you do that. You know this
I know,
expression?
I know that expression. I hate it, though.
I think it's funny, but I'm surprised you don't know it, Matt. It's the idea that people are like,
It's like
living on the
gospel
internet
truth.
too much, or like being
I
too
don't
like,
like
it's like, you got to get out and touch grass.
I thought you wanted
Yeah, but
me
it
to...
makes me think of touch cloth, which is an old school expression for having to take a crap so bad.
That's
that
gross.
yeah.
But apparently in Elden Ring, the idea of having to touch grace when you find those sites of grace is sort of a little wink, wink, and nod to the term touch grass, reminding you to don't just live in Elden Ring, go outside. But anyway. But you can reach us indeed all over the internet. We are Conspiracy Stuff on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Conspiracy Stuff Show on Instagram and TikTok.
Oh, yes, you can reach us on the phone lines. It's a voicemail. Our number is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, give yourself a cool nickname, not your government name, and let us know if we can use your message on the air.
There's some jazz to that, baby.
I'm trying my best. Username and message. If you got 3 minutes, say anything you want. If you don't want to use voicemail, why not instead use our good old-fashioned email? We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.